again, welcome. This is our information session for our 2025 Equipping the Local Church Grant Cycle. We're so excited. This is our fourth year that we are able to offer these local church grants. If you would like to hear some of the stories from previous grant recipients, there are quite a few on our website just to get some ideas of previous projects that we funded. And I'll share a couple of those stories before we conclude today as well. If you're not familiar with the Foundation for Evangelism, I actually should change this graphic. We just celebrated our 75th anniversary. And for those 75 years, our goal and mission has been to be a catalyst to equip disciples to share the good news of Jesus Christ. And we do that through three primary funding streams. The first is raising up gospel leaders. That's ensuring that all leaders, lay and clergy, receive quality Wesleyan evangelism training. Historically, for us, that has meant funding professors of evangelism at our seminaries, but in recent years, we've been able to expand that out to provide training for leaders on different paths. For us, also, laity is a really important area of focus. The foundation was founded by laity and has had a focus. And we realize while it's important to get clergy the training they need, the priesthood of all believers and lay folks are the ones who have been there, will be there, the backbone of the church. So engaging the ministry of the laity is really important for us. And then equipping the local church. We realized a few years ago, so many of our churches are smaller in size, but are gifted and passionate and ready to do new and exciting things to reach people in the name of Jesus, but could use some help, especially with some financial resources. So that's why we launched our Equipping the Local Church Grant Cycle. And so these grants are intended for smaller local churches. And we'll talk about the criteria a little bit now. So again, we are looking to provide funds for smaller local churches to engage in evangelism experiments and make a church-wide evangelism focused culture shift. So a lot of times, again, smaller churches that don't have large budgets or a lot of extra money, we want to provide some freedom and some flexibility to try something new with some funding support. We're not looking to, balance people's budgets or, provide for new staff people or building improvements. But if there's a ministry or a dream or an opportunity that's emerged, but you've got the people and the passion, but could just use some extra financial help, that's what we hope to come alongside and help with. So who qualifies for these grants and how we define kind of the size? So we actually have two tiers for our grant. Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. We have some folks that are having a little trouble hearing you. Is your volume up all the way?
Let me see. I think so. I'm using my earbuds. Are they?
It sounds louder to me now.
Okay. I can hold my microphone closer.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Terry. So let me just talk about our two tiers of grants. So we have a $5,000 grant and a $10,000 grant. The smaller churches, that's what and this is participation size. We understand that a lot of churches have a lot more folks on their rolls than our active participants. So our smaller churches are for folks with participation of 1 to 95. That includes worship or other activities throughout the week or virtually. And then the medium-sized churches, those are for $10,000 grants. That's 100 to 250 people. That can also be churches working together. So if you're part of a multi-point charge or want to work with other churches in your town, either from your denomination or from another Wesleyan tradition denomination, you can apply for the $10,000 grant. Again, needs to be Wesleyan tradition. So affiliated with one of the Methodist Wesleyan denominations. And then for this particular grant, the church needs to be based in the United States. So there are a couple other grants and funding options we have beyond the UMC, but for the Equipping the Local Church grant cycle, you must be based in the United States. So who does not qualify for this grant? Again, it has to be Wesleyan tradition or Methodist denomination related congregation. We aren't funding mission trips or one-time projects. So we're looking for, or like a one-time mission effort. These are programs that are building relationships and are ongoing within your community. So we're also not funding your congregation to leave your community and go somewhere else and serve. This is intended to be grounded in your surrounding area. Campus ministry. Now, just a little note on that. If you are doing ministry with college age young adults in your church, you can apply. But this is a local church grant, not a campus ministry grant. Again, these are experiments, so we're not funding an ongoing ministry or project. If it's an expansion of something you're doing, or you're looking to reach a new audience, or you've been doing something and somebody has expressed a need or an idea to make it larger or more impactful, that would be considered, but not just to keep on doing what you've been doing. No capital improvement, building improvements, no additional staff positions or equipment that isn't part or necessary for this ministry. Not to individuals setting out for an evangelism initiative, again, grounded in the local church. And then, of course, if you're a local church, you are a nonprofit and have a 501c3. So you need to be denominationally affiliated. Okay. Now, this is what I was sharing, the grant amounts. So again, $5,000, just to be clear, when you're applying, if you will have you select the size of your church. So if you are under 100, you'll be considered for a $5,000 grant. If you're the 100 to 250 or churches working together, that's the $10,000 amount. Here is the timeline. So our grant cycle is actually open right now. We opened on the 15th of January, and we will close on February 28th. Over the months of March and April, that's when we'll be screening the applications, and ones that have been screened successfully will continue on to readers and reviewers. Each application that is moved forward will have at least 2 different folks reading and scoring the grants. And then in May, your church will receive notification whether or not you received the grant, and you'll get the agreements and the forms and all of that. And you'll actually receive your check, one payment, by the beginning of June. So that's the timeline for our review process and receiving the money. The grant cycle is for a year. So what we found over our first 3 years of awarding these grants is that folks who've received the awards really enjoy hearing from one another. And so a few times during the year, actually, sometime first in the summertime, we'll gather folks together just to talk about what's going to happen over the coming year, for people to introduce themselves to one another and hear about their projects. Then in November, we'll do a check-in with everybody just to see how things are going. And again, folks have really enjoyed hearing about what people are doing, what they're learning. If there's something that they tried, but it isn't working, how are they pivoting? What might they need to do differently? And again, when you submit these applications and proposals, it's your best guess. You've done your homework and you have an idea of what you want to do, but we know sometimes things don't go according to plan. So if you do receive a grant, there will be permission if you get started and you need to pivot to just communicate with us and you can make those changes. So we'll do a check-in, and then around December 15th, your mid-year report will be due. It's pretty simple, a one-pager, and would really encourage everybody as you get going through the projects to send us updates and pictures and stories and videos. We love to get those. And then in the spring, we'll have a final Zoom, have you gather your stories together and then submit your final reports in June. Again, not overly, we're not asking for a ton of information, but just want to know, how did things go? How did you spend your money? What did you learn? And there are 3 basic categories that we're going to invite you to create metrics around that I'll share in a moment. So how do you apply? Again, we're accepting applications now. The deadline is the end of February, and we use a granting online platform for all of our work that's called Submittable. And you can access that portal through our website. So you'll just go to foundationforevangelism.org and our grant seekers page to be able to access that. So here's a screenshot of our website. So just go to grants and click on grant seekers, and that will take you to this page right here. And then on that page, if you scroll down, we also have a lot of the information I'm sharing right now and some FAQs. So it's a great resource if you're trying to remember, what did she say about the selection criteria? All of that can be found right here. And this is the page also where this recording will live. So you can find this there as well. So once you get to this page, again, click on the grants, and we don't actually have a thing for submittable, I think, on this slideshow, Terry, do we? Okay. You will need to create an account for Submittable, and you can have multiple people from your church or from your team working on the application together, but we need one main contact person for Submittable. So you'll be able to share the work and to, if you need to get a financial report from somebody, they can help you populate that. You also don't have to do your whole grant application in one sitting. I've personally applied for some grants that require you to complete it all in one sitting, or you lose what you've done so far. This is, you can start it and come back and finish it later. That's not a problem. So what are we looking for in proposals? A few years ago at the Foundation for Evangelism, we spent a lot of time really working on and defining our values. And those are the lenses through which all of our grants are evaluated and assessed. And so these are the questions that actually our readers will have on their scorecards to determine if your proposal aligns with who we are and what we're seeking to do. So our first, and I'll also tip my hand here, these questions are weighted the highest. So for us, it's really important that whatever your project may be, is that it's grounded in the why. There are a lot of organizations out there doing good things in the community, but how does whatever you're doing connect with your faith and your discipleship? And how does it share God's story and invite other people to enter, develop, and deepen their relationship with Jesus? So this is thinking about, again, how are we not just good, nice people, but how are we sharing God's love and addressing where the good news might make a difference in the lives of folks in our community? So this is the why. And of all of the areas I'm going to go over, this area for us has additional weighting because it's really important. So that's evangelistic. That's our first value. Our second is Wesleyan, which how do we define Wesleyan? One of the main characteristics is that our initiatives, our evangelism is holistic in nature. So how are you developing ministries or projects that intentionally connects the love of God with love of neighbor? How are you meeting people in all of their needs? So if we think about the way that Jesus engaged with folks and how the early Methodists engaged, yes, they cared about spiritual needs and helping people to understand and experience God's grace and love and assurance and peace, but they also cared about and helped folks meet additional needs, physical needs of feeding, clothing, providing shelter. So physical needs, communal, emotional, relational needs, all of those are part of inviting people to be part of community. So how is what you're doing holistic in nature? And how are you not just starting a relationship with people, but inviting them into ongoing relationship with you and with Jesus? So this is also, it's a discipleship question. Thirdly, steward. So of course, we want you to be good stewards of the funds that are awarded, but we also want you to assess who you are, who God has gifted uniquely your congregation and equipped you to do and be for the world and to live out your mission. So that's what we're going to ask you. One, how are you going to spend the money? But how is your congregation uniquely gifted to meet some of those needs that we just talked about? And how do you know, right? How have you done the work to kind of do some asset mapping and assessing what might be the thing that you can do to not just copy what the church down the street is doing or what you've seen other churches doing, but how might you be able to make a kingdom difference for your community with who you are now? Leaders, shared leaders. So this is really important for us, is that the clergy and the ministers and the laity are working in partnership. How already is leadership shared, and how will you continue to identify and raise up lay leaders? How will you get more folks in your congregation involved with this initiative? Equip, buy-in and storytelling. So again, how are you continuing to train, to invite, to add folks to what you're doing? But then how are you also sharing your findings and learnings with others? That's one thing that we found is that while every project will be a little bit different and you can't really copy what somebody else is doing, we can learn from one another about your process of how you discerned what you're going to do and how did you also know whether or not it was working. So, how are you regularly telling that story and sharing that with others, both internally and externally? Because what we found also is that as folks get engaged in these ministries and people in their communities learn what they're doing, they want to know more and often want to come and join and be part of that. So, how are you, again, not just keeping this to yourself, but going to tell the story? And then Catalyst, again, we hope these funds will be a springboard for new energy, for new participation. And it's been amazing to watch with $5,000 or $10,000 what a lot of communities, the way God has opened the doors for other folks to come along and to partner, and that there's been far greater transformation and impact than they could have imagined or wrote in their initial proposal. So how do you see this being a spark for your congregation and for your community? And who might be additional partners that you could invite to join you in this work? So those are the types of questions that we're going to ask in your application. On our website, we have a screenshot or PDF copy of the application. So you can actually look at all the questions before you get into submittable and start answering them. So if you even wanted to print that out or write them down and bring them to a leadership meeting or a committee meeting to help folks start brainstorming before you get into the platform, you can do that. But let me just share a few examples over the past couple of years of what these grants and ministries have looked like, and talk about kind of how they assessed whether or not this was working, or if there were new components they could add as they began to build relationships. So let me just start with the picture that is on the top there with the kids. So this was a church that was an older congregation, didn't have a lot of young families in their church, but close by there were several apartment complexes, and the church had a big field that they owned adjacent to their building. So their grant was to start a soccer program for their community that would be free for neighborhood kids. There weren't a lot of free activities for community members. So they had some connections in the community who could coach and provide some of the mentorship around playing soccer. So they recruited them to help, and then asked the members of the congregation to be the fans, to show up on Saturday mornings and, adopt a team and get to know the families. As they got into that, they also would provide snacks and prayer before the games each week. As they got to know some of the families, they realized a lot of these families didn't attend church, and a lot of the parents had experienced some negative things or some church hurt, and so had really walked away if they had been part of a church at some point. So they were able to have some spiritual conversations and kind of meet these folks who wouldn't walk in the door on a Sunday morning, and create space for some spiritual curiosity and growth. They also learned that some of these kids were on free and reduced lunch at school. And so instead of just doing snacks, started doing a warm meal for the kids after the games each week. So what they initially set out just to have a soccer league. They ended up being able to, and just doing a devotion or a prayer, to be able to connect with the families on a deeper level spiritually, to provide some additional physical needs and to help build community. And a lot of the families also didn't have other grandparents or other family members close by. So some of these members of the congregation were able to be like adopted grandparents for these kids. So that was the first one. We'll move down. This was a church in the DC area that had a neighboring homeless shelter that asked them to provide a weekly worship service. And so their grant was to help them get the supplies that they needed and to start that up. Well, as they got into working with the folks in the homeless shelter and got to know the folks who were staying there, they realized that a lot of them, some of the stumbling blocks for them to try to find a job or to make a fresh start was that they didn't have access to clothing for an interview. A lot of them didn't feel comfortable because they hadn't been to the barber or to the beauty salon and needed to freshen up their haircuts. Others didn't have a resume. So as they started off by just doing these worship services, they then reached out to people within their congregation and beyond to offer weekly haircuts, to sit down with the folks to help them prep for interviews or create resumes, and also started donating clothes so that they would have outfits to wear for interviews. So this church, again, started initially thinking about spiritual needs of having a weekly worship service, but through their work together, built relationships and provided some of the physical, emotional, and social needs as well. And then the final picture, this is a church that was neighboring, is in a college town, actually on the edge of a college campus. And one of the staff folks herself had two children who were on the autism spectrum and never really had a church or a place she could bring her kids to worship. And so asking around in the community and just through her kids' school, realized a lot of these families felt isolated, and there wasn't a place, at least a church, where they could bring their kids. So their grant was for to create a weekly worship experience and create a space that was appropriate for these kids and accessible for them and their different sensory needs and issues. Provided, trampolines if the kids needed to bounce, different lighting situations, provided for kids who had mobility issues, allowed them to fix some of their doors to make it more accessible. But the picture here, what they learned after getting to know the families, is that a lot of them had never been able to experience something that most families experience, which is going to the mall or to a store and getting pictures with Santa. Because the kids with their sensory issues, it was overwhelming or scary. And so they were able to create this private space and have Santa and Mrs. Claus come and for these families for the first time to get Christmas pictures with Santa. So again, initial proposal from a need for community, belonging, church space, worship for children with autism and their families, but then getting to know them and hearing their stories, we're able to expand it to meet these additional needs. So all very different, but again, grounded in meeting people where they are to offer what we ask in the evaluations and the assessments is, how are you participating in and sharing in abundant life, and God's abundant life with your community? And we ask in those three areas. So as far as physical needs, social emotional needs, and spiritual needs. And so that's what we have folks think about. We don't give you your metrics of what you need to measure. We allow for your leadership team to develop that yourself, to figure out, what are we actually going to look for, and what are we going to measure? How are we going to know if it's working, and if we need to pivot? So those are a few of our grant stories from the past couple of years. And at this point, let me stop sharing and check with Terry to see if questions have come in.
Yeah, so we've had several questions come in. I've been able to answer a lot through the chat, but would you mind to list out currently the Wesleyan tradition denominations that we work with?
Yeah, so we currently have grants across the United Methodist Church, the Global Methodist Church, the African Methodist Episcopal, African Methodist Episcopal Zion, the Christian Methodist Episcopal, the Free Methodist, the Wesleyan Church, and the Church of the Nazarene.
Okay, awesome. We also had several folks wondering if they are 501c3 or not. So if you are a church under one of the umbrella of one of the denominations that Heather just mentioned, you are covered under that umbrella. So you are a 501c3. That is not necessarily true for organizations that are maybe connected with the church but are outside the church. But if you are an established congregation under a denomination, you are a 501c3.
Yeah, that's just your tax exempt status is the 501c3.
Let me see if there's anything else. Sorry, a lot's coming in at once.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Somebody said we were blessed to receive funding before. Can we apply this round, even though we have not finalized our last grant yet?
Yes, so that's a great question. We have received some repeat applications and have funded, but it needs to be either a new initiative or an expansion of what you've been doing. So not just a continuation. And that's true for folks who've never applied before. So again, these are experiments. There's something new. But yes, you're welcome to apply again if you want to do something different.
We had someone else asking, we're UMC, but we're looking to launch a new community. They're a pastor to an existing congregation. Would they apply with their new congregation?
Yeah, I guess if you're ready to launch. So we have had some new church starts apply and receive funding. Just know this is something we offer every year. So if you're just getting ready to launch, this might be something you want to keep in mind and wait until next year. Also, if you are in the process of discerning what you would like to do, and this is an invitation to everybody, as I've gone through the criteria and you want to do something and you've got folks who are excited, but you're not exactly sure what that should be. We have another program right now that involves training, evangelism training of how do you create an evangelistic culture? What might God be calling you to do? And then at the end of that, so it's about a 6-week training program that congregational teams go through together. At the end, you can apply for a grant. It's a little bit smaller, it's $2,500, but it's pretty much guaranteed if you go through the training. Our application just closed for the spring cohorts, but we'll open it again in July. So if you start thinking about this and you want to do something, but again, aren't sure, but could use some help, check back with us in July and consider applying for a cohort um, to get some of that training.
Yeah, so I just dropped a link in the chat for everybody. So that will take you to the page for the training program that Heather's talking about. And on that page, there's a place where you can sign up to receive notifications of when that next cycle for that training program is going to be opening up. So that is in the chat. So we have kind of a specific situation. It's a United Methodist Church, but they're partnering with the Baptist Church as well. They want to know in their application when they're counting their congregation size, do they count just their congregation size, or do they include the Baptist Church's congregation size within theirs as well?
I would just count yours. If you want to talk more specifics, feel free to email or reach out. But I would just consider your church right now.
And I can answer this real quick. Somebody asked if they'll receive this presentation. It will be linked on our grants page as soon as it becomes available. That will be before the end of this week, and that's where the recording will be as well. Let's see. So someone asked, we're not affiliated with the Methodist Church. Can we apply? So you need to be affiliated with one of the denominations that Heather listed just a few minutes ago. That's not necessarily Methodist, but there are the 8 denominations that Heather mentioned that you would need to be fall under the umbrella of. Mm-hmm. Somebody asked, can projects like starting Messy Church and our congregation qualify?
Yes, we've had some Messy Church programs that we funded in the past. Again, what we're going to look for in your grant application, because there's always kind of the next new thing that folks are doing or that's really popular, but we want to see not just that you're going to try the thing that's popular, but have you done your homework to figure out that would be of interest to folks in your community, or that you would get a good response for that? So again, there's always kind of the next greatest thing that folks are trying. But how are you guys gifted and equipped to launch Messy Church well and to connect with folks in your community?
Someone else asked if their initiative is focused on discipleship for youth and young adults. Would it be eligible even though it's for a targeted group and a specific mode of need meeting ministry?
Yeah, so we, again, as I shared with some of the examples, the one church that had the ministry geared towards families with children with autism, right? Or, the soccer program for the kids and their families. So yeah, if a targeted group is fine. But again, how did you choose that particular ministry and why? That's what we want to read about in your application. So the questions that were raised, make sure as you're filling out your application that you're not just telling us, again, what you're going to do, but how you decided on that and why and what difference you think it'll make. So we're almost more interested in that information than the what.
Awesome. Someone asked, could you share what could be a few reasons why a grant is denied when it's a request to expand an initiative?
I think a lot of times, and to be honest, just to give you guys an idea about the numbers, last year we had about 300 applicants and we're only able to award about 50 grants. So sometimes there are some good proposals that we just unfortunately don't have the funds to be able to award. So that happens sometimes, but some of the things that might flag one not to move forward or that it might not score as highly, again, is that we want to expand it, and we think this is who we're going to reach or what we want to do, but you haven't explained why or how you know that, if that makes sense. Again, also we want to make sure that that evangelistic component, like I said, that's weighted significantly in our evaluation. So there's some folks who have great ideas, but it's not really grounded in the why, and that's not explicitly stated. So to score highly, we need to see that in your application.
Cool. So next we've got a question from a familiar face. This is from Dario Vargas. Hey, Dario. But he asks, we're a global Methodist church that launched a nonprofit organization with a 501c3. The nonprofit is a plain glass on their website with the purpose to attract people to come to the nonprofit and then the church. The nonprofit is the front porch of the church. How could we demonstrate it's a Wesleyan organization?
If it's an official part of your church or connected, that would count. Yeah.
All right, someone else asked, we launched a warming center 3 days ago as a pilot program. Will it still be considered new?
Yeah, so if there's something that has just been launched, but this would increase your capacity, or you're just trying something, yes, you could apply.
I think I can answer this one. We're an AMEZ new church hoping to launch a summer program for the children in the community. Do you have a grant to support this? So just from that little bit of information, it does sound like you are eligible to apply for the Equipping the Local Church grant. So there are obviously some more specifics, but just based on that information, you would qualify to apply for this grant. Let's see, another question about, I think this is about the cohorts actually. Can we receive the evangelism training if we are not Methodist associated? Again, I mentioned this before. You don't necessarily have to be Methodist, but you do have to be affiliated with one of the 8 denominations that Heather talked about a little bit earlier. Let's see. Somebody said, if we apply as a cooperative parish, do we just use the 50c3 from one of the churches?
Yes, that's fine. Because there still will be, even if a church is working together, we'll have one point person that will send reports to and things like that. So whatever church is represented by that person, you can use their number.
Yeah. Kind of an odd question. How would a literacy program fit in your grant? So that's a pretty specific question that would require some more detail. However, I would say there's no reason a literacy program would not fit in our grant cycle as long as, it's a Wesleyan tradition denomination or church, or the church and organization are partnering together. So that one would require a little bit more information on what the program is and what's going on. But at base level, it seems like that program would fit as an eligible initiative for our grant cycle.
Yeah, and again, that evangelistic component needs to be there in the why, and the connection to helping children or adults with literacy, how that's living out their faith or helping them to experience God's abundant life.
So someone said, we've been working on a project to be implemented in April of 2025. Should we apply this year or next year?
I mean, you would get the funding early this summer. So if you're ready to launch, I'd go ahead and apply. Or if you just want to get it up and running and you might tweak some things or be looking to expand next year, you could apply then. So it depends on kind of where you are with it.
Someone else said, if we have in-person worshipers and people who watch online, should we just count the people who attend worship services in person for our participation count, or can they include online as well?
I would include, if the folks I wouldn't necessarily count if you have a lot of visitors, but folks who are regular, once or twice a month attending online, I would include them in your numbers.
This kind of answers, I think, this next question as well. How do you count virtual folks? By using the number of views or the number of folks who comment? So you can kind of say what you just said. Basically, if they're attending multiple times, so if they're popping up on the views on Facebook multiple times per month, then I would count that way. Heather, any other suggestions?
Yeah, and again, it's rough. We're not going to check your roles or anything, so it's just whichever category you think best fits your context.
This is a really good one. Are we allowed to use AI tools to assist in the writing of our proposal?
Um,
I think I would say yes. I don't think content-wise that I would use AI to generate content for your application because that becomes pretty obvious to us when we're reading. But certainly, if you have an outline of your program and you want to organize that through, ChatGPT or some sort of AI, yeah, I think that that's fine. I don't think there are any restrictions in the application platform that would stop you from doing that. But I would just caution you that if you're looking to pull content from AI, that comes across to us as we review applications. So would you add anything to that, Heather, or is that pretty much good?
Yeah, that's good. And again, we don't expect any of you to be professional grant writers. Be authentic in this. It doesn't have to be perfect. Just tell us your story of who you are, what God has placed on your heart. Again, you're not getting graded on your grammar or your punctuation but yeah, just be honest and authentic in your application.
Gotcha. Somebody said, if you're going to become a part of the July training cohort with the grant application after completion, can you still apply for the local church grant?
Yes, so that's the thing with our cohorts, because the amount is a little bit higher with this open cycle. If you go through one of our trainings and you decide, you know what, I'd rather put our name in the hat for a larger award, you can do that. But it's not, the longer we've run these open cycles, the more applicants we get. So it's just more competitive as opposed to pretty much getting the sure seed money at the end of the training.
Right. And you can't apply for both.
Right.
In the same cycle year. Now, if you received the seed funding from the training, if you have an expansion or a new program or something, the next year that the open cycle comes around, you would be eligible to apply for that. But you certainly can't apply for both at the same time.
Yeah. And again, the cohorts will be offered twice a year. So we'll have a late winter, spring, and then a fall session, with each having a small grant cycle at the end.
Heather, I don't know if you want to go into this, but a couple of folks have asked if we can explain what messy church is. Do you want to take a minute and explain that, or I can try to find a link maybe and send that to
Yeah, it's just for folks who aren't going to come in the door Sunday morning for traditional worship. It just provides a more informal, often midweek experience. A lot of times with arts and crafts, just different way of presenting scripture. So it's just, again, an alternative to traditional Sunday worship that also tends to be intergenerational. And yeah, Terry put the link there for you.
Yeah. Oh, and it looks like somebody else had plugged it in as well. So thank
great.
you. Mm-hmm. So somebody asked, how many reviewers and their qualifications?
Yeah, so Terry and I will screen all the applications just to make sure they meet our basic criteria. And then each application will receive 2 reviewers, and some of them are our board members, some of them are professors, that evangelism professors that we fund, or other kind of friends of the foundation. So I actually do a training with each of them to make sure they understand what we're looking for and go over the scorecard. And I review all of their scores as well. And we actually average the 2 reviewers' scores. And so that's our process.
Yeah. All of our reviewers, though, are affiliated with Wesleyan tradition denominations in some way, and they're familiar with the structure and well, the importance of evangelism. So
yeah,
yeah,
we've had retired bishops and DS, like other folks have. There's been a wide variety of folks who've served as readers.
right. Someone said you must have referenced like a church's story before, or a story being told in the application. They said, are you referring to the church's story or the story itself around the ministry that they're applying for?
We will ask you to tell us about your church and your context. So that's one thing we're interested in learning about. And then the stories that we're looking for after you receive the grants are what happens in the ministry. But then, of course, the other story, the bigger story, is how does what you're doing help to embody and share God's story with other people? So I use story multiple times. So I'm not sure what exactly the question is, but that's
basically, I think we could just say the story is a large part of what we're wanting to see in all contexts. We want to see the big picture, but we also want to see the specifics of the story of what your initiatives are doing, who they're reaching, why they're reaching those folks.
Yeah, and what we've storytelling, if you can create that practice within your church, and if this ministry can help you foster that, numbers are important, but stories are what touch people's hearts and can really open people's eyes. So we would love for this to be an opportunity for your congregation to become better storytellers and to use this ministry as a vehicle to do that.
Yeah. So we're coming up on time, so I'm gonna say just a few more questions and then we'll end. But this is a good one. Do you wish to see a budget that shows how we would apply the amount of the grant?
Yes. So within the application, you'll submit your rough budget of, if you're applying for $5,000 or 10, how you would spend it. Again, we know these are rough numbers. So there's a way for you to just apply, to fill out the chart with numbers, but would love to see if you have a narrative budget as well of if you're spending $1,000 on equipment, let us know actually what that equipment is and how it's going to be used. So on and submittable, you can attach additional documents and forms, and you can also complete like letters of reference or support. So if you have other organizations working with you or other folks from your community that you're working with that say, yes, this is a great idea and this is really needed, those types of additional letters of reference and support really can help your application. And again, more information for us is better. That's so another reason why something might not move forward or be funded is you don't really tell us what we need to know. So sometimes folks will just do 1 or 2 sentences for each question, and that doesn't give us the information that we need most of the time.
Yeah. So I got a message from Maribel. Maribel is going to be in one of our upcoming cohorts, and she said if we are in a cohort in February, can we apply for this specific grant? So I can answer that. Maribel, yes, you can apply for the open grant, but it's more of a toss-up on what grants will be given. Since it's an open cycle and a lot more people are applying for that, you may get a greater amount if you apply for that. However, if you apply for the smaller grant cycle that happens directly after the cohorts training, that's a guaranteed smaller amount of funding for your congregation. So that's totally up to you. You can do either, but you cannot do both.
Yeah, and I would say you're probably going to be more successful writing after you take the training. To try to write it before you take the training, it'll be harder. The training is supposed to equip you to be able to write a successful grant.
Someone asks, how many grants do you award in each category? Do you want to go into that?
Yeah, so we typically award around 50. And it just depends on we've got enough funds available and to award about 50. It can be give or take depending on the number of applications we receive in each category. But we typically have done about 30 of the smaller, 20 of the larger. But again, it can fluctuate a little bit depending on the number of applications we receive.
Gotcha. And I'll share real quickly, Leona Logan, she put a great little note in here. She put, one of my former churches was granted this award. In total, the congregation was 9. So even a tiny church can do great things for the kingdom. That's awesome. It's amazing, an amazing story. So that just shows you kind of the variety of size and of ministry work that can be done, and kind of shows our expectations, or I guess lack of expectations, because there's really not we don't try to separate the smaller congregation from the bigger congregation. The ministry work being done is incredibly important in both situations. So
Yeah.
I'll answer one final question. We've got several that have come in, but we're running over on time. Somebody said, what is the cost for the cohort training? There is no cost. That is why you apply to join the training. So there is no upfront cost or anything. You just have to go through and apply and be selected for that training if you're eligible.
And that's made possible from a grant we received from the Lilly Endowment.
Gotcha. All right. Well, I think that's everything we can cover today. Like I said, this recording will be available, and then the presentation that Heather shared will be available as well by the end of this week. So anything else from you, Heather?
No, and I want to thank you for your interest and your willingness. And as someone who's pastored smaller congregations myself, it's sometimes a little bit frustrating, or you feel like you can't do all that a larger church can do, but little churches can and do make a difference. Sometimes you might need to stop doing a couple things or just focus on 1 or 2 things and do that really well. And so that's what we're hoping to do, to provide encouragement and support for you to live into who God's calling you to be. So thank you for your time and for your leadership and for your passion, and hope to receive some applications or see some of your churches in a future cohort.
All right. Thank you, everybody. See ya.